There's a version of loneliness that nobody talks about. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of being with someone and still feeling completely unreachable, of wanting connection, genuinely wanting it, but the moment it arrives, the moment someone gets close enough to really see you, something in you shuts down. You go cold. You find reasons to pull back. You tell yourself you need space, that things are moving too fast, that something about this person isn't quite right. And then they leave or you push them out, and for a moment there's relief. And then quietly, there's something else. Something that feels a lot like loss. If that resonates, this video is about you and about why the walls you've built that have protected you for so long might be the very thing keeping you from the life you actually want. Avoidant attachment is the least understood of the insecure attachment styles, partly because avoidantly attached people are often the last to recognize it in themselves. From the inside, it doesn't feel like avoidance. It feels like independence, like self-sufficiency, like simply knowing what you need. Avoidant attachment develops, like all attachment styles, in early childhood. But unlike anxious attachment, which forms in response to inconsistent caregiving, avoidant attachment typically forms in response to caregiving that was emotionally dismissive. Not necessarily cold or cruel, just not attuned to emotional needs. The caregiver who said you're fine when you were crying. The parent who was physically present but emotionally distant. The household where feelings weren't discussed, where vulnerability was seen as weakness, where you learned early that needing things from people led to disappointment. So the child does something remarkably adaptive. It learns to need less, or more precisely, it learns to suppress the outward expression of need, because expressing need doesn't work. The attachment system doesn't deactivate. The need for connection doesn't disappear. It goes underground. And the child develops a fierce, protective self-reliance that follows them into every relationship they will ever have. As an adult, avoidant attachment is subtle enough that it can hide behind very reasonable sounding explanations for years. You value your independence, which is true and healthy up to a point. You just haven't met the right person yet, which might be true but is often a story told to avoid examining the pattern. You're focused on your career, your goals, yourself. All valid, all potentially real, all potentially a very sophisticated way of keeping people at a safe distance. The signs tend to emerge most clearly inside relationships. You feel suffocated by a partner who wants more closeness than you're comfortable giving. You find flaws in people who are genuinely good for you, not because the flaws aren't real, but because finding them provides an exit. You are far more comfortable in the early stages of dating, when things are light, undefined, low stakes, than in established relationships that ask for real vulnerability. You find it easier to talk about ideas, work, opinions, than about feelings. Not because you don't have them, but because feelings feel dangerous in a way that's hard to explain. You are competent, often highly competent, in every area of life. But intimacy, real, sustained, mutual intimacy, is the one place where your usual tools don't work. And that gap between how capable you are everywhere else and how lost you feel here is one of the quietest sources of pain in an avoidantly attached person's life. Here is something that most content about avoidant attachment gets wrong. Avoidantly attached people are not unfeeling. They are not incapable of love. They are not narcissists by default, though the surface behaviors can sometimes look similar to someone on the outside. Research by psychologist Mikulincer showed that avoidantly attached people have the same emotional responses to relational threats as everyone else. The same cortisol spikes, the same activation in the areas of the brain associated with fear and loss. The difference is that they have learned, through years of practice, to suppress the outward expression of those responses, to disconnect from the feeling before it reaches the surface. This is called deactivation of the attachment system, and it happens so automatically, so efficiently, that many avoidantly attached people genuinely don't know it's happening. They don't experience themselves as shutting down. They experience themselves as being fine, as not needing much, as simply being wired differently. The suppression is not dishonesty, it is a survival strategy so deeply ingrained it has become invisible. The anxious-avoidant dynamic deserves more attention here because it is where avoidant attachment causes the most visible damage to both people involved. When an anxiously attached person and an avoidantly attached person enter a relationship, they activate each other's deepest fears with extraordinary precision. The anxious person, craving closeness and terrified of abandonment, moves toward. The avoidant person, craving autonomy and terrified of engulfment, moves away. The moving away confirms the anxious person's fear. I am going to be abandoned. So they pursue harder. The pursuing confirms the avoidant person's fear. I am losing my freedom. So they retreat further. Both people are in genuine pain. Both people believe on some level that the other person is the problem. Neither person can see that they are reenacting something that has nothing to do with this relationship and everything to do with what love taught them to expect a very long time ago. The tragedy of this dynamic is that both people usually care deeply about each other. The connection is real, but the attachment systems are incompatible in their current form. And without awareness and work, the relationship becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. The anxious person gets abandoned. The avoidant person gets engulfed, and both walk away with their original beliefs about love confirmed. Healing avoidant attachment is different from healing anxious attachment, and it requires a different kind of honesty. The anxious person's work is learning to self-regulate, to need less external reassurance, to tolerate uncertainty. The avoidant person's work is almost the opposite, learning to tolerate closeness, learning to stay when the instinct is to go, learning to recognize the moment of shutdown, that subtle internal click when the walls come up, and choose consciously to stay open just a little longer. The first thing that helps is developing emotional vocabulary. Many avoidantly attached people struggle, not because they don't feel things, but because they have never learned to identify and name what they feel with any precision. Emotions that can't be named can't be communicated, and emotions that can't be communicated create distance by default. Starting small, not with a partner, not in a high-stakes conversation, but privately in a journal, in therapy, in quiet moments of self-reflection, building the habit of asking, what am I actually feeling right now? Not what do I think? Not what do I want? What do I feel? The second thing is learning to recognize the withdrawal impulse before acting on it. Avoidant attachment operates on a hair trigger, a small perceived threat to autonomy, and the system starts looking for the exit. Learning to notice that impulse, I want to pull back right now, without immediately following it creates a window. In that window, there's a question worth asking. Is this person actually threatening my well-being? Or is my system just doing what it always does when someone gets close? The third thing is practicing small acts of vulnerability deliberately, not grand emotional declarations. Those feel overwhelming and tend to backfire. Small things. Admitting uncertainty, sharing something you find difficult, staying in a conversation about feelings a few minutes longer than is comfortable. Each small act of staying open teaches the nervous system something it has never fully learned. That vulnerability doesn't always lead to disappointment. That closeness doesn't always mean loss of self. That you can let someone in and still be okay. The fourth thing, as always, is therapeutic work. But for avoidantly attached people, the therapeutic relationship itself is often where the most important work happens. Because the same patterns that show up in romantic relationships show up in the therapy room. The urge to keep things intellectual, to stay at a comfortable emotional distance, to terminate when things get too real. A good therapist notices this, names it gently, and in the noticing and naming, something begins to shift. You didn't build these walls because you're broken. You built them because at some point, they were the only things standing between you and a pain you didn't have the tools to handle. They worked. They kept you safe. But safety and aliveness are not the same thing. And somewhere underneath the self-sufficiency, underneath the independence, underneath the very reasonable explanations for why this person wasn't right or this relationship wasn't the time, there is someone who wants to be known, fully known, without having to manage the other person's reaction or monitor their own exposure or calculate how much is too much. That want is not weakness. It is the most human thing there is. The next video looks at something different, what a secure attachment actually looks like, and more importantly, whether it's something you can build, regardless of how you started. Leave a comment with one word that describes how this video made you feel. I'll see you in the next one.